Hello coders. So today I wanted to help you guys out with your upcoming quiz, and so I'm going to go over a few things that I think will be helpful, namely how to write an array, work with a list again, and also how to pull information out of a list uh, in the way in the displays that I want to see. So I think you'll find it informative and possibly um, helpful for your quiz. Uh, I want to also talk about the upcoming quiz a little bit. What I want you to know is that the reason that I'm grading it as an all or nothing quiz is because I want to encourage you to devote the amount of time that I told you that I want you to devote to the class, which is between preferably 2 to 3 hours per day on this class, and to emphasize that that's what's going to be required to do well. And But it's the only quiz that I'll grade in this manner. After this, of course, we'll grade in a typical manner. But because this is review, this is stuff that you should already know from your previous work, whether it's a previous class or whatever. You should already know this material. This is a complete review. And for that reason, I'm grading it more harshly. But it's something that if you watch the videos and you practice on your own, you should have no problem completing. Okay, having said that, let's go ahead and get started with a demonstration. So, and where we're going to start, we'll go ahead and start with a new project. And like I said, I like to use, for my purposes, I like to use the console applications for testing. So we are going to use a console app for this one. All right, console up, and I'm just going to use, I'm just going to call this temp because I don't plan on saving this video. So, and let's just throw this up there. All right, we have our default subroutine that pops right up, and let's go ahead and start doing some coding. So the first thing I need is I need to explain what I'm doing. So and you know what? I'm actually going to put this on top. All right. And so I'm going to create an array and I'm going to put some information in it so that we have something to work with. And I'll explain all the code as I move along. So I need to declare the array. I'm going to declare its array as P, and I'm going to make it, I'm going to have 5 entries, and I'm going to declare it as a type of string. And then let's populate the array. And I like to just do shortcuts, so let's copy that and add some names in here. Okay, so what did I do? I created an array and declared it the array P, and the reason I use the letter P is it just stands for me. It's just for persons, so I decided to just use the array name and name it P. I'm gonna have 5 elements, and I guess I better fix my elements because I didn't do that. So let's do that real quick. All right, so I have an array P 5 elements of type string, and here's my strings. And there I just listed some names, so Bobby, Becky, Rose, April, Henry. And I want one that has a null value because I'm going to be doing some experimentation with the null value. All right, the next thing, and so that completes the array. The array's done at that point. The next thing I want to do is I want to create my list that I'll be using. So I declare the list. I'm going to use my typical use in data for input data. But I mean, you could call your list anything, so don't worry about that. And yeah. All right, so what I did here is I declared a list in data as list. I'm going to do it of type string, so it's going to be a list of strings, and this is the code for creating that list. This list isn't. I didn't create this list as a class. I'm not going to have multiple properties in this list like we have in the past. Here I'm just collecting one element, so just names. I'm not collecting multiple elements of a list. So for a simple list like this, you don't need to create a class. You just say, here's my list, and it's going to be of type string, and there's only one property that I'm going to have to it. So very simple. And for this example, that's all we need, because really the example here is the list, is the array, the list, and then how to input and output data. All right, so I'm going to create a for loop. I'm going to use int16. I'm going to set it to 0, and it's going to sequence through the different elements of the array. And this is where things get kind of cool. I'm going to do some things here, but I'm not quite ready to do them yet. So let's comment that out for later. There's some work that needs to be done first, but this is pretty much done. I'm also going to need another thing here. I'm going to do, which I'm going to have to create a sub. And it's going to output the data in the list to the console. Here is where I'm going to actually do what I'm saying in there, where I'm going to actually pass it to a test input function to test it. So nice little for loop, and this part is mostly done with exception to these two things. So now I need to make some more things. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create the function. Okay, so let's do that here. I guess I'll do some commenting first. All right, so the function's going to test the entries that I'm going to pass up here in this for loop, and I'll be testing them for null or empty values, and then I'm going to add the results to the list, and I'm going to return the list. So easy weasy. Now we need to create this function. I'm going to create it as a private function. Not really necessary, I guess, to say that, but I mean, I'm just used to doing that because this won't be used anywhere else by any other classes. But if we were going to call this from another class, we would want to, of course, do it as public. Okay, so let me code a little bit, and then I'll explain it. Every function has to return something, so let's go ahead and And date doesn't exist yet. We will create that right now. And then let's see. And since this is all related, let's go ahead and format this a little better. Okay, so this is what I did. I'm creating this function right here, and I labeled it private, or I assigned it private, so it's not going to be accessible from any other classes. It's going to be called test inputs, and that's because I'm going to be testing the inputs. It's going to take two arguments. One of them is going to be S, and that just stands for the string, whatever I'm going to pass it, so string. The other one is I'm going to pass it as a list, and it's going to be the list of type string. So L is going to be the name of the list, as type string, and these are the two arguments that are being passed into the function test input. Next, on line 32, I have dim in data, so I'm creating my list as in data of type string, and you've seen this code before. I used it up above. The next thing I'm doing, though, that you might not have seen, is I'm going to take in data, my newly created list, and I'm going to assign it to whatever the list I passed it to. So whatever the list is here that I pass it with information is what I'm going to assign my new list to. Okay. Next, I need to create a Boolean value, which is part of your quiz assignment. So let's get that part done. I usually just set mine defaulted to false. And this is the first time you'll see this piece of code that I'm showing you. Okay, so what I did here on line 35 and 36, where my cursor's at, is 35. I declared and initialized the Boolean value t. So the variable t is a Boolean value. Set it to false. I'm going to be using it later on in the code. And I take t, and now I initialize it to s. And here's s. So whatever the argument s is that I passed, I'm going to test it to see, is there anything in it? Is it null or is it empty? And the next thing I'm going to do is, it's because this right here is going to return true or false. True, it's going to return true if it is empty or null, and it's going to return false if that's not the case. So if it's empty or false, t is going to be set to that value. All right. So the next thing I need to do is I need to populate my list. And I forgot to do something. Let's see here. And I'll explain all this here in a minute. All right. Okay, let's check it out. So the function named test input takes two arguments. S is a string, L is a list of type strings. I create, on line 32, I create a brand new list called inData. InData is set to L, okay? And then I'm going to have a test variable, which I call T. It's set to Boolean. It's declared and initialized as false. T is then set to the test of is null or empty for S. So whatever S was, or whatever string I'm passing, I'm testing it to see is this null or does it have a value. Then I'm setting T to true or false. Then I have a condition here where I'm going to test things. And here I'm saying, if T, okay, so T will be false, then if there was data, then, I can't even spell, then it is added to the list. So basically it came back as the test was, there was information here basically. It was not null or empty, therefore the test was false. So let's go ahead and add whatever the data was into the list. Over here I say, well, no, it returned true. And that means that is null or empty returned true. So it was empty or null, and therefore I'm going to input a string that says this was null, just so that there's something in there. You don't have to return something, but I want to return something because I want people to know that there was nothing in there at that point. There was something wrong. Now I'm going to end the if. You have to end if. So I used an if-else statement. So if else and then end if, and then I'm going to return the data and the function. And there's the full function. All right. So now we can go back. We have our function, and we can actually do part of this this for loop here. So now we can say, okay, now we're going to say in data. So we're going to go back to our list that was created in this subroutine, and we're going to say equals, and now we can call our function that we just created, and we can pass it the two arguments. And the first argument that we're going to pass is going to be the p at index I, and I'll explain that in a minute here, and the in data list itself. I like doing this, and I'll explain this here in a bit. All right, so here's what it means. The list that we created right here is going to be equal to whatever happens here. So remember, this function that we just created is in itself returning the list. So when we set it to this, it's because it's going to be returning the list. So the new list here in data is going to be assigned to whatever the list is that is returned, and that's good because we want information coming back. So the function test input, we're passing two variables. The first variable is pi. Remember, this is in a for loop. So we're going to iterate through the array, and we're going to iterate through the elements of the array 0 through 5, and we're going to input these information: Bobby, Becky, Rose, April, Henry, and nothing. And we're going to pass those into this function test input along with the list itself. So back in the function, it's going to take that information and it's going to test it for whether it's empty or not, and then it's going to add it to the list, or add this part here that says it's null, and then it's going to return the in data list. So up here, this in data gets set to whatever was returned through each iteration. So the list is constantly growing. That's what's happening here. This list is growing. Every iteration it grows as it sequences through the elements, as it iterates through the elements. Okay, so now that part's done. Now we need to do so. The something else that we need to do is this part right here, the sub that outputs the data to the list. Because right now this will all work. Let's go ahead and run it just to see what happens. And nothing happens. Well, actually, a lot happens. Everything here actually happens. All of this is compiled and runs. The difference, the reason that it looked like nothing happened is because there's no output. So it's doing exactly what we told it to do. So the next step we need to make is we need to do this piece of code right here that I marked here with this part. Is we need to create the subroutine that's actually going to output our data. But I do want to point out one thing before I move on, and that's that when we ran this and it did that, that was a good sign, because that meant that all of our code worked. There was no errors. It all ran, compiled, and was great. So all we need to do is create our outputs, and we'll be on track. You should compile regularly just to make sure that you haven't made any coding errors. And so that probably should have compiled a little bit earlier just to test things. But you do want to compile probably, after you write, a subroutine or a function, just to test it. Okay. So having said that, we need to create another subroutine. So let's go down here and do that. And I'm just going to say output list in console. That makes sense, because that's exactly what we're doing. So again, I'm going to go with private sub and output list is what I'm going to call it. Oh, not that. That's good. Oh, end it. Okay, so here I went ahead and created a new subroutine. It's going to be, I named it output list, and it's what I'm going to be calling up here. So let's go ahead and fix this right now, because we can do this part already. We can copy that and take it back to where it goes, right here, and say we're going to do this, and we're going to pass it to, as you can see, this the subroutine is going to take I guess one argument actually. We're going to take the list is all we're looking for. We're looking for the list. Oh yeah, that's right. Because okay, so we're going to this is going to output the list to the console. So the only thing we're interested in is the list. We're going to take the list and we're going to process it. So here, all we need to do is enter the in data because we're going to pass it the list. That's it. And so this part now, the main subroutine is complete. It's done. We created the array. We populated the array. We created the list. We're testing the list. We have a test here where we iterate the list and populate the list, but we test it at the same time. And then after that's all done, then we say, okay, well, let's take that completed and fully populated and tested list, and let's just output it. So this is the important part, and that's what we're going to work on now. This is also going to contain some new information on that'll help you guys out. Okay, so the first thing we need is we need to create our new list. And since I'm lazy, I'm just going to go up here and copy this because I'm using the exact same thing again. Voila! Excellent. And just like before, we're going to set in data equal to the list. So what did I do? I create a brand new list called in data. I'm assigning the new list in data to the whatever list I passed. All right. I need an output variable, so let's use s as string, and let's initialize it to nothing. I usually do that. And we need a for loop. Why do we need a for loop? Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to create a loop that's going to output the contents of the list in order, in whatever order of the elements that they were entered. And so we're going to use a for loop for that. Because now there's many ways that you can do this. I'm just doing what the way that is easiest for me. So like I said, I'm sure there's some wrong ways, but there's many right ways. And that's another way to think about it. Use our ampersand to concatenate. Ooh. And we're going to use our old VB new line that I introduced you to before. And because I want good formatting, I'm going to use two of them so I can have two spaces, so I can have a space. The first one just returns a line and the next one creates a space. That's what the two VB new lines are for. Okay, and next I'm going to create my for loop. And yes, I'll explain all this in a moment. All right, so what did I do here? So I already explained this part, so we'll just jump straight down to here. I set the new variable s to equal and then also add the output in order, so some text, some hard-coded text I want to have in there, and I concatenate a new line, so that way this will be output, then it'll create a new line and then a space, and then I have my for loop, and my for loop is going to output the contents of the list. So the list was passed here as L, and it was set to indata. Now I'm going to take indata, I'm going to take .i, and what I'm going to do with this .i is this is going to be my index. So I'm going to sequence, I'm going to iterate through the index, and so every output, which was up here, everything I entered, it's going to output it, add it to the string s, and then it's going to create a new line. So that way it'll always be in a new line. So for loop, I need to know, and this part here in the for loop is what I'm saying is I'm saying I is an integer that's assigned to 0, and I want this for loop to iterate through from 0 up to whatever's in the indata list. So however many elements are in there, indata so we have to say indata dot count to count, and then subtract 1. The reason subtract 1 is because the count is always a positive number. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And I need to start at 0 because the index is at 0. The index right here starts at 0. So I have to capture 0 and then move forward. So in the count, it's indata.count. So however many elements are in the list, minus 1 to capture 0, and then output the contents of the list. At the same time, concatenating it over and over again. So the string s is growing. It's growing with each output of the list, and then with a new line, so that way it's added to each other. So let's run this and see what happens. And that happens, which means all this works, but we still, and so did it go to the console? Yeah, it sure did. It's just that well, it didn't actually go to the console. It's getting ready to go to the console, but all this actually happened. So what we're missing here is we're missing something at the bottom, right here, where we are going to output results. Let's do that. So here we're telling the console to write line s, so whatever the s string is when it's completed with the for loop, and then pause so we can actually read this stuff. All right, now we should be able to see something. Let's read this. Okay, so here's our output. Output in order right here, and then the list, just as it was entered. And then you see we get this was null, which happened in our let me just get as much of this as I can, and let's take this off too. So this was null because here in our test inputs function, everywhere there was a name, it was added, but when it didn't find the name, then it jumped down here and said, well, yeah, but add this little message. This was null. There was a null value. And if you go back to our original entries, you can see this is in order with our null value being notified as null. All right, let's stop this and let's show you how to use a different type of loop to pull out the information in reverse order. To pull it out in reverse order, again, there's multiple ways that we can do this. I find that using a while loop is the easiest way to do that. So let's do that. Now, someone might say, yes, there is a reverse function that's built into Visual Basic that we could use, but it won't work for our purposes, and I'll explain that in a minute here too. So we got to get our count again so that we can work with something. I'm going to use J this time, and I'll explain all this in a moment. Okay. That's not what I wanted to do. Let me see here. Okay. Concatenate with yep, new line and then make a space. Excellent. This will get interesting right here, and I'll explain it. Again, there's many ways to do this. This is the algorithm that I use to get to the information that I want. Perfect. Okay, so here's what's happening. With this one, we're going to use a while loop that is going to retrieve the data in reverse order. And so I create a variable j, I assign it to the count so I can capture 0, and then I have my usual s string, and this time I'm going to say, okay, s string is going to equal the output in reverse order with a separation of the line. Then I'm going to use the while loop right here on line 75. Now the while loop, I'm saying that iterate through this sequence of code so long as j never becomes -1. If -1 happens, then the loop stops. Okay, that makes sense. Now, I take s, the string, and I'm going to concatenate to s the in data, so whatever's in the list, j, as we sequence through the elements, and I'm going to create a new line. And the next thing that's going to happen is j is going to subtract 1. This is the short code for j is equal to j minus 1. That's what this actually is. Let's go ahead and write that. That's all that means. This is the shorthand code for that. Okay, so what is this? What are we iterating through? What's j? Well, j here is the actual full count. So j is the full count. So if there's 5, in our case up here, there's actually 6 entries. So 6 entries. So j is actually going to be equal to 6 minus 1. So j is equal to 5. So I'm saying while j does not equal 1, do this. Okay. So we know what j equals. J equals 5 because we set it right here on this line of code right here on line 72. J equals the count, which was 6, minus 1 is 5. So j equals 5. So as long as j doesn't equal 1, or minus 1, iterate. So s concatenates in data j, whatever the element in j is, and what's j? J is going to be 5 plus the new line. So it's going to output whatever was in element 5. What's element 5? Element 5 is the null value. All right. The next step, and let's actually do this a little better. We can split our screen, and let's go back up to our elements. There we go. And here, now we can talk about this. Okay, so the next thing that's going to happen is j is going to subtract 1. So now j equals 4. All right, what's 4? 4 is Henry. So now j equals 4. Is j equal minus 1? Nope, 4 does not equal minus 1. So we go down here, we concatenate to s in data element 4, and we output that, which that's going to be Henry, and we create a new line. Next, j comes down, subtracts 1. Now j equals 3. We check it. Does j equal minus 1? No. What does j equal? J equals 3. So s is going to concatenate again the element in j3. What's j3? j3 is April. And then we output that with a VB line, and we do it again. And so the string s just continues to grow with this output in reverse order, going from 5 to 0. Eventually, it's going to equal minus 1 because j is going to subtract, down to minus 1. J sees that it's minus 1, it breaks the loop, kicks it out, and we go down into the output. Now, what's going to happen is the console.writeLine is going to output the contents of s. And s has been growing this whole time. It's just been concatenated itself. All right, let's see what happens when we run this. And there you have it, output in order from the for loop. And this is going to be exactly what was here. The next part is going to be output in reverse order. This was null. So this was null is going to be the element 5, and then Henry, April, Rose, Becky, Bobby in reverse order. And that is how we do that. Now, probably the only other thing I could do to make this a little bit nicer is up here, I could say, let's do, well, yeah, we gotta stop this. Let's get back to regular code. And so right here, it's probably a good idea to put a little, a little message here saying end for loop. And then let's format it a little bit better. We're going to throw another maybe line in. And that's just to give a spacing. And then we don't need to do any of this, but probably just for readability. Might as well stay consistent. Okay, and that's for you guys, so you can see this is our for loop. Starts here, ends here. We create a new line. Our while loop starts here, ends here, and that's what happens. Okay, so now let's take a look and see what. And there you have it, in order, and then in reverse order. This is the while loop. And this is the for loop. So I hope that was a good explanation of how to use a list, how to populate the list with an array, and how to create the function, how to test the function, how to use the is, null, or empty function that's built into Visual Basic, how to test it, and most importantly, how to use a while loop to output the list in reverse order. That's all. I hope that was interesting for you guys.